by knowing the mechanisms of neuroplasticity, we know that we can change those pathways, and we have the strength and the power to do that.
Dopamine spikes with the pursuit of a reward, but not necessarily the achievement itself.
Sometimes we have these patterns, habits, behaviors, thought processes, etc., that are holding us back. But they have been reinforced through repetition because the brain works by repetition. Again, it's not you, it's your brain. The key, as boring as it's going to sound, is just
Nicole, thank you so much for being here today. I love following you. I love your content. I have learned so much about my brain and my mind, but also how it relates to everyday things like love and breakups and focus. And you just put out such amazing things. So thank you for being here.
Wow, thank you so much. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'd love to start by laying the foundation because it's so empowering and exciting to know that our brains are not fixed. And we can change our behaviors and our habits, and we can reprogram at literally any age, which is a relief to hear. And a lot of us have probably heard of neuroplasticity, but I'd love to learn a bit more about the mechanics of it. Can you explain what the principles of neuroplasticity are and what we should know about how it works to our advantage?
Yes, so absolutely. And I'm glad you said that, because that's the consensus of Rewire, my book, is that I wanted people to be able to think, what a breath of fresh air. We can change, and all the programmings, all the inputs that were given to us by somebody else in our formative years, that can all be changed if we wanted to. So, and you can argue that it's empowering. It gives us a way out, a light at the end of the tunnel. So neuroplasticity is the ability for our brain to essentially create new pathways. So in our brains, we've got neurons, and these neurons communicate with one another to transmit information. The more a neuron communicates information with another neuron, the more those two neurons become strengthened. The way that happens is that the receiving neuron, if you will, the postsynaptic neuron, receives information from the presynaptic neuron, and it inserts more receptors in the cell membrane of the synapse. So it essentially becomes better at receiving information. And what that means for us is that these pathways get created, meaning that we strengthen a particular pathway and we start to operate with automaticity. What that means is that we operate without thought. So it's this pathway that we go down that's very familiar. The brain doesn't necessarily differentiate between right and wrong. We have a moral compass, of course, in our frontal cortex, but down to the neurobiology, our neurons will prefer to take the route that is more traveled. The strengthened pathway is always going to be the one that it prefers, unless we actively choose to change that pathway. What that means is that sometimes we have these patterns, habits, behaviors, thought processes, etc., that are holding us back. But they have been reinforced through repetition because the brain works by repetition. And again, it's not you, it's your brain in some ways. And by knowing the mechanisms of neuroplasticity, we know that we can change those pathways, and we have the strength and the power to do that. But it alleviates that pressure of thinking, I've really wanted to, but now I keep going down this route. And again, I just want people to have compassion, because it just means that your brain is doing what it knows best to try and save energy for more cognitively demanding tasks. It's not going to remind you to create new habits if it has a habit that's already been ingrained.
And so that automaticity, that's what kicks in when, without thinking, we brush our teeth before bed, and we don't have to actively make the choice. We just know it. Or the route home we've taken 100 times. We're not like, should I take this route? We just know to take it. So we know that repeatedly we were able to form those habits. And so it's possible, but it can sometimes be hard to kick off a new habit and to implement it and to make it stick. So could you walk us through the anatomy of a habit, like the cues and the triggers and the key to making them stick?
The key, as boring as it's going to sound, is just repetition, and I think a lot of the times people will want to create a new habit. Maybe it's exercise. Maybe you want to go to the gym more regularly. But what tends to happen is there's a couple of things that happen. One is that people think, I don't have an hour to work out. So instead of doing 20 minutes, they just don't do it at all. But the brain, again, works by repetition. So even if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even if you just get out of the door and you go to your car and you think, okay, I actually don't have the time, still do those steps. Go to the gym, do 5 minutes, do 10 minutes. It's still better than nothing. right? And eventually 10 minutes will be easier, 20 minutes will be easier. And then before you know it, an hour is what you prefer to do. So the anatomy of a habit is essentially the formula, if you will, to neuroplasticity is repetition and time. So depending on how much time and repetitions you put, there can either be an exponential growth or a linear growth, if you will. Either way, what the underlying theme is that it's going to go in a certain direction, regardless of whether you're multiplying it or whether you're plussing it, adding it up. It's still going to be an addition to your life. And a lot of people think that the brain is elastic. It's not elastic, it's plastic. What that means is that if you put in the work and then you have an off week and then you bounce back the week after, you're not suddenly going to have forgotten that 1 week of effort that you did put in. But I think people think, oh, well, I've fallen off the bandwagon, so there's no point. And then they really do fall off the bandwagon, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think understanding that we have this plasticity and not elasticity means that the groundwork is still there. So you can just pick it back up. Not all is lost and keep going. So with habits, we've got these cues, triggers, rewards, and they tend to operate in a way that is preferable to the reward. What that means is that sometimes we will choose immediate rewards over a long-term reward. So you come home from work and you think, oh, I'm really hungry. I can't be bothered to cook. I'm just going to eat a slice of toast with cheese. Classic. Or order in, right? And the thing with dopamine is that it's a reward-based learning mechanism, and that your brain will try to revert to instant gratification if we reward the brain with instant gratification on a regular basis. But we actually have parts of the brain, so the anterior midcingulate cortex, so part of the brain that is essentially responsible for tenacity and willpower. So the more that we do things that we don't want to, the stronger that part of the brain, the bigger that part of the brain becomes, so that we get better at then overcoming that resistance of not wanting to do things.
Wow, so that's so cool.
Yeah. So the more we do it, the more we want to do it, and the better we become at valuing that long-term reward. So now it becomes like clockwork. It's a little bit like discipline. It's just something that you do. You don't think about how you brush your teeth at night. You just do it. But if you never did it, and I asked you to do it every single day, you might think, well, I have to brush my teeth every single day for the rest of my life. That sounds like a big task. But after a while, it just becomes part of what you do, right?
Yeah. Wow, that's such an interesting shift too, because I feel like societally we push towards doing things that we're good at, that come with ease, that like, oh, you're not very good at that, like just let that go and focus on something that comes naturally or that you're automatically good at. But that, what you just said, goes to show how it's the process of doing something that's difficult and the grit of sticking with it will like multiply your ability to do hard things throughout your life. Like that's amazing to know.
And, there's a couple of layers to that. You can always say yet at the end of every sentence. I'm not good enough yet. I don't know how to run properly yet. I'm not strong enough yet. With repetition,
exactly.
It's going to change. And it will change because that is the neurobiology of, neuroplasticity. It's the fundamentals to any change physiologically and, mentally as well. So at some point it will click. You just have to push that resistance, and I talk about this in Rewire a lot, is this resistance where it feels sticky and the brain wants to revert to the pathways that are more traveled. But if we just keep pushing down these new routes, eventually they will become easier. They will become automatic. So like a path that has been created, maybe you had to, lay down the cement, and then you had to put down the bricks, and then you had to put some lights down, and eventually turns into a tarmac highway. But with time, repetition, and effort, that will happen. Absolutely.
Is that why it's so freaking hard to change? Like we know it's possible, but sometimes it feels impossible to change a really like set habit or behavior or way of thinking or way of doing things. Is that because our brain is used to an automatic kind of set path? And so the energy that it takes, it's possible, but it just takes a lot of perseverance to like find a new pathway.
I think less than perseverance, it's the fear that we are incapable of doing it. I think people don't give each other enough or themselves enough credit. the brain is extremely resilient. The brain is extremely capable of making changes. But I think we've somehow, maybe through societal input, started to think that maybe we're not good enough. We don't understand the power of neuroplasticity or the power of being able to change. And so it daunts us. It makes us scared and it keeps us stuck. But,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that change is easy, but it's simple. Simple's not easy, but it is simple. And all it is just repetition. When you make that mistake, when you do the thing you weren't supposed to do, instead of beating yourself up about it, just think, okay, I'll move on. And that's a really interesting notion, because the human brain, even though it is wired for negativity, we have this negativity bias that essentially tells us to focus on the negative aspects of our life, which can often look like, well, you're not good enough at running. You only ran 2 kilometers this week, and when you said you were going to run 10, actually the fact that you ran at all is amazing. So this negativity bias can keep us stuck. Even though we have this negativity bias, we know through scientific research that the brain responds better on positive reinforcement. So how many times have you berated yourself, and how many times has it changed your behavior?
Yeah, no, it doesn't work for me at all. Yeah.
It doesn't work for anyone. The only time we learn from negative information or bad news is when the news or the information is very bad. Like if I was a neurologist and I said to you, Jill, you smoke one more cigarette tomorrow, you're going to die. You might be like, okay, wow, okay, I'm going to absolutely stop.
Yeah. Usually a rock bottom. Like I changed my drinking habits when I felt I'd kind of hit a rock bottom with how much I was drinking. But it took that rather than all the mornings where I was just like having anxiety and be like, oh, you're such a piece of shit. Why did you drink that much? Like that never worked. I always say you can't hate yourself into self-improvement. No. It's not a good enough motivator.
But it's because, that shame keeps us stuck. Shame makes you feel bad about yourself. And so you think, okay, well, it doesn't matter. I will just continue to perform in the bad habit. But then what we've ingrained in our minds subconsciously is that we can perform the bad behavior. I say bad, or the negative behavior. Let's say negative, because it's not bad. You perform the negative behavior, but subconsciously that you're going to beat yourself up about it later. And that's your brain's attempt to gain control of the situation. Let's do it anyway. Right. We're going to beat ourselves up about it, and that's our form of control. But we know it doesn't create change. And the best thing to do is to congratulate yourself. Hey, Jill, well done. You didn't drink today. You drank less. I know that you're still drinking, probably not as much as you'd like to, or not as little as you'd like to, but we're working towards it. Hey, I know that you have been saying you want to go to the gym and you only went once this week, but it's fine. You had a lot on. Let's just congratulate ourselves on that instead of the fact that you didn't go 3 times a week, because our negativity bias will want to say, well, you're a piece of shit. You didn't go to the gym 3 times like you said you were going to. And it doesn't work. We have to keep staying positive, because the one thing about habits is that tenacity and sticking with it is the thing that seems to work when it comes to clicking, if you will, with the habit.
Right. And the positive reinforcement, does that release like that hit of dopamine of like you're giving yourself a little mental reward, and then it helps propel you to keep doing it?
Exactly. And I'm glad you said that, because dopamine is a reward-based learning mechanism that says that made us feel good. Let's do that again. So when you congratulate yourself, you're like, ooh, feel good chemicals. We want to keep doing that. And so you will continue on your journey to want to self-improve.
What else should we know about dopamine? Because it seems like it's, the motivation molecule. It seems like a huge player, and we're always like, even on social media, it's like going after my next dopamine hit. Like it's become like such a well discussed thing, but there's a lot of interesting nuances to it that I've learned through you. I saw that you posted about how dopamine spikes with the pursuit of a reward, but not necessarily the achievement itself. That's super interesting. I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, so we call that reward prediction error. So dopamine is released in 2 circumstances. So, in reward-based learning. So dopamine is more like the molecule that puts you in movement, in forward drive, either to attain a reward, to put your motivation drive to attain something, or it actually initiates physical movement as well. So that is why dopamine is implicated in Parkinson's disease. So, but in reward-based learning, we have something called reward prediction error. What that means is that dopamine is released under 2 circumstances. So number one is if you have a predicted goal. so you know the reward is going to be administered at a particular time, then dopamine is released in pursuit of the reward. When the reward is then released or administered, it then drops. The other time that dopamine is released is in unexpected rewards. And this is why it's so dangerous with gambling, with phone use, with phone addictions. Will there be a notification or a comment or a reply? I don't know about you, but I don't have notifications on my phone. So I have to go into Instagram to check. And that in itself is also just as bad as having the notifications to some degree, because I always know there's going to be a message or a comment or something. So my brain is saying, will they, won't them? And that uncertainty of anticipation means that if there is then an unexpected reward, dopamine is also released then. What that means for us in layman's terms is that it can be easy to become addicted to something that is so easily available, like your phone, especially if it's within reach. So when we give in to that urge of wanting to find a reward, have you ever had it when you're sitting down for work and then every 10 minutes you're like, I'm just going to check my phone. I'm just going to get a cup of coffee.
Every day of my life. Like,
I'm going to check my emails.
It's
I'm just going to refresh those things again. As if I want any emails to come in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's dopamine, you know? And the more we give in to those urges, the better our brain says, go and find that reward. So I always talk
and that's why we're like stuck in a loop of like seeking the instant dopamine hits and the instant gratification instead of like the harder one.
Exactly.
Dopamine, like the going to the gym, the like seeing a project through to completion.
Yes.
But we were after the instant.
Yeah. And that is why, you know, I always say the 5-minute rule is one of the best hacks for the situation. So when you get that urge, wait 5 minutes. If you still have the urge, then give in. So this one works perfectly for things like I'm craving a cookie. I'm craving something to eat. Wait 5 minutes. If you're still hungry, then you're probably hungry and you need to eat. If you are not, it's probably likely just one of those sudden urges that you get that then subside. And what happens is over time, those sort of triggers and cues will be less frequent, if you will. Have you ever left your phone at home and you constantly reach into your bag and then you don't even know why you're doing it? That's same 100%. Concept.
It's like you're literally physically trying to grab it and it's not there, and you know it's not there, but you're still like you're still doing it.
And the great thing is that this can change within a week. You know, these sudden urges. Like if I said to you, Jill, I'm taking your phone away from you, the first day is probably going to be hell. And I don't know anyone who's going to disagree with me on that statement. Like maybe you're not someone that's on your phone a lot, but I think if you took my phone from me, I'd probably be like, oh, this is uncomfortable. But I can guarantee that by day 2, day 3, you start feeling completely different. And that's the wonderful thing about the brain, is that we can adapt quite quickly, actually. You can start to limit how many times you give into that urge, and within a week, you can see a major difference already. One of my biggest hacks is to leave the phone alone for the first hour of your morning, and to ideally leave your phone alone for the last hour, ideally maybe 2 hours if possible, before bed. That is in itself going to change your life, because you're already limiting 2 hours a day, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is when you think about it, your phone use. I don't know about you, but my screen time's quite high.
Oh my God, it's so bad. And those are 2 like really important hours of the day as well, because we're like priming ourselves for the day and like priming. It's like if you start the day with sugar, you're setting up a lot of like blood sugar spikes and a lot of like instability, you know, physically and how you eat for the day. It feels like the first thing I do when I wake up is check my phone, and I'm starting my day with that cycle beginning and then ending it on my phone. The last thing I do is check my phone and then put it away and then go to sleep. And that's how we set up our sleep for the night. So even those 2 hours can make a huge difference. I need to try doing that.
Absolutely. And you know, if you were somebody who had a penchant for gambling, let's say, and you started gambling at 7 a.m, you're likely to then be in this kind of like hole, for lack of a better term, by the end of the day. Whereas if you just started sort of gambling in the afternoon, I mean, it's not the perfect analogy, but it's the same, like, you know, it's the same with anything. If you started drinking first thing in the morning, it's the same concept. And
you're probably going to drink all day.
And exactly. And I do believe that it's the same thing with our phones.
Oh, it feels addictive. I feel addicted to my phone. And so much of my work is on my phone, but then it leaches into not work. Like what I've noticed, because I do a lot in social media, is I'll open my phone and open social media with the goal of I have to make a post or I have to do something on social media. And then an hour goes by and I was not working for an hour on social media.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing I learned from you is how dopamine can warp your sense of time.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how that I'm sure that comes into play when we're getting that dopamine hit from checking social media, checking our phones. And all of a sudden we're like, what happened? How did an hour pass? How has I experienced that constantly. I'm like, how the fuck did this happen? And so is that time speeding by without us realizing? Is that like the effect of that dopamine, that cheap kind of dopamine hit?
So dopamine is responsible for time dilation. It's anchored in your perception of time. This is why individuals with ADHD may struggle with timekeeping, because the perception of time and how much time something would normally take is skewed by dopaminergic dysfunction, either too much or too little. We know that with ADHD, it's not just dopaminergic dysfunction, it's also norepinephrine, and it's also potentially an abundance. Sometimes it's also a depletion. There's different sort of characteristics of ADHD. But what's interesting is that, have you ever been in a situation, like you said, with your phone where you're stuck in the reels or you're stuck on TikTok and you're having a good time, dopamine is high. And when dopamine is high, time is perceived to be smaller / shorter. It's the reason why we say, time flies when we're having fun. It's actually true.
Yes, yeah.
Time flies when we're having fun. Our perception of how we perceive time, or our ability to perceive time, has been shifted quite drastically neurologically. So it's not just, a concept. We know that this actually happens. And it's the reason why when we're bored or when dopamine levels are low, things can sort of drag out. You're sitting at the opera and you're like, okay.
Yeah, you're writing the exam and you're like, I've been here for 10 hours, it feels. Yeah.
And that's exactly why. Wow. So we can lose time on social media.
Speaking of bad habits, we've talked a bit about how we can stop responding to that trigger as much and create a bit of time. Is there any other advice that you have for how to break a bad habit, how to weaken the response to a trigger that might come up?
So you've got a cue or a trigger, and then you've got the behavior, and then you've got the reward, right? So what you could do at the end of a bad habit, or a negative habit, if you will, what I would say is add on something positive. So let's say you smoke the cigarette. You've been trying to quit smoking. Instead of berating yourself, you can say, okay, well, actually, I've been meaning to drink more water. I've been meaning to breathe deeply more often. So I'm just going to put that at the end of the sequence. What will happen eventually is that will start to dismantle the firing pattern of that sequence of events. So eventually what will happen is you'll get a cue, smoke, but then your brain will go, but I know that at the end something positive comes here. So I'm just going to skip that part because I know that smoking doesn't make me feel good. I'm just going to skip the good part where I feel great about myself. So you're quite literally turning a negative into a positive.
I love that. That's such a refreshing approach, because I feel like usually when we do a habit that we didn't want to do, we usually fall into the negativity bias. We berate ourselves, we're upset, and then you either fall off the wagon and do more of it, or you punish and restrict yourself even more.
Yes.
And so that's such a good idea to start implementing something positive that helps us bypass the thing that we don't want to do.
Absolutely.
That's almost like a habit, like a new way of habit stacking, habit stacking a good habit on a bad habit, which I love.
Exactly.
I'm curious if you have any other hacks or tips for effectively creating more habit stacking for habits that you want to implement, that, how do we make it easier, and implementing routines, because I feel like I'm more likely to stick with a habit if I create a routine out of it that is doable and that really sticks and that builds upon something that I'm already doing. Whether it's okay, I know I drink water first thing in the morning, so now I'm going to start taking my supplements. That's a guarantee. And then now what can I add to that to keep going?
Yeah. Those kind of small, if you will, habits, you can chunk those together, and then it'll be again, automaticity. This is what I do in sequence, and then that's my part of my morning routine. Morning routines appear to make us feel very good about ourselves, and it kind of sets us up. What I would say is one of the biggest hacks as well is that for the first 8 hours of your waking day, so it doesn't matter what time you wake up, your first 8 hours, you will have higher levels of dopamine and norepinephrine. Even if you are a night owl, okay? There are people who are night owls and have these kind of second winds in the evening. But nonetheless,
I'm a night owl.
You will still have higher levels of dopamine and norepinephrine first thing upon waking. The first 8 hours of your day. So if you wake up at 8, that's fine. It'll be 8 till 4. If you wake up at 6, it'll be 8 till 2. If you wake up at 12, it'll be 12 till 8 p.m.
Okay.
What that means is that the habits that require more effort, generally speaking, those are the ones that require more energy. And what I mean from that is physical energy. So not what you perceive to be harder. So, the internet ate me alive because I said that something like a meditation habit can be in the evening versus a running habit. And they were like, oh, how dare you say that meditation's harder than is easier than running. And I was like, yes, I understand your point. But when you think about it from a physiological perspective, to contract and relax your muscles and propel yourself forward in space, it does require more energy than sitting down and redirecting your thoughts to something that's more anchored, right? It just is. And the internet can argue 100%. With me. It absolutely is.
I'm shocked that people argued with you on that, but like, that's welcome to the internet.
Yes. But, so you might be an avid runner. So you might find meditation harder, and that's fine. And this is why there's nuances to these conversations. But what I would say is take from this what you need. The first 8 hours means that you should incorporate habits that you find harder, generally speaking, the ones that require more physical effort. If you are a Ironman runner and you don't find physical effort very difficult, then that's fine. You don't need to, you can put your meditation in the morning versus the evening.
Yeah. And maybe for some people, it's like accounting or like numbers work if that doesn't come easily to them. If I do that when I'm starting to burn out my mental capacity for the day, I'm like useless.
Gone. So, whatever is the most difficult thing for you, put that in the first 8 hours of the day for habit acquisition. And then the second 8 hours of your day, you have higher levels of serotonin, which means that you tend to be a bit slower, a bit calmer, because serotonin gets metabolized into melatonin, which then helps you go to sleep. So something that's maybe easier for you. For me, it would be something like a meditation. For some people, they want to swap those two around. That's absolutely fine. Whatever works
maybe
for you.
Maybe it's cleaning or
Yeah, exactly. Something that you're not going to require to overcome the resistance. Put that habit in the evening versus the morning. So pick your two habits, find the hardest one, put it in the morning, or whatever time it is that you wake up the first 8 hours, and then find the other habit that you're trying to acquire and put that in the evening. And if there's a couple of difficult ones, put them in the morning. The other thing I would say is that you want to, the internet argues online about this, and scientists argue about this as well. We haven't quite pinpointed exactly what is the formula for habit acquisition. Some say that you should pick 6, and then you're likely to stick with 3 or 4. I personally believe, and this is my area of research, where I've essentially looked at energy conservation in the brain, how we spend energy on tasks. So for me, as a cognitive neuroscientist, has looked at attention and these kind of mechanisms around how we spend, quote unquote, mental currency, my suggestion is to pick one, get really good at it, move on to the next thing. Because what happens in January is people will say, oh, I want to start going to the gym. I want to start eating right. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do that. I'm going to meditate. And then by the end of the month, you're so burnt out because you've got kids, you've got dogs, you've got your job, you've got all these things that motivation runs out. And the only thing that was fueling you was this motivation, because the actual energy to do these things was compromised from the beginning.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One year I tried with my New Year's goal setting, I made the list of goals and habits that I really wanted to implement that year, but then I assigned one per month so that I could try to spend a month getting better at it before moving on to the next one.
Yes.
I don't really know how I nutted out, to be honest, but it was nice to try a different approach, because I certainly know that having 10 to 15 things I'm trying to focus on starting January 1st doesn't work for me. It's too much. So That makes a lot of sense.
Well, like me as an example, I've been wanting to become a bed runner for eternity, but I do exercise regularly. But what I've also done is I picked up guitar last year, and I've been really diligent with guitar. You know, I do even 5 minutes on a day when I don't have a lot of time. So I've actually become, quote unquote, relatively quite good. And when I think about the running habit, I always think, yep, okay, I'm going to be compassionate with myself. I'm doing guitar quite regularly. I'm in a new country speaking Portuguese, which I've been learning. And I picked up tennis last year. So it's like, you know, I've got three, if you think about it, 3 habits now. But people don't see that as maybe habits because they think, oh, it's skill acquisition or it's a language. But it's still the brain having to spend energy on these different tasks and has limited amounts of cognitive energy on a daily basis.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about how Duolingo has like won at what they do because I've been learning Spanish on Duolingo and I'm on day like 220 or something. And truly, it is one of the only things that I've ever stuck with doing every single day. And I'm fascinated by why this is working. I think it's so interesting the way that they've gamified it, the way that there's like a reward built into Duolingo, the streak, the not wanting to lose the streak, and like the visual aspect of like, if I don't do it today, I'm going to lose that streak. So they've really like tapped into something interesting, and even though you could look at that as a hobby, I've been really looking at it as a habit that I'm excited about, that I've like stuck with.
I love that.
100%. There's so many debates about how long it takes to make a habit automatic or to make it stick. What's your take on it all?
So there was an amazing annual review. They synthesized a plethora of body of research when it comes to habits. What they've concluded is that it takes anywhere between 18 to 254 days to create a new habit. And that could seem quite daunting, you know? Okay, well, that's a big standard deviation across where I lie. But what that means is that it depends on how much time, effort you put in. Remember I said to you, your repetition and time could either be an addition or a multiplication where it's exponential. But it also depends on, you know, whether you have other habits that need to be broken. So what I would see it as is it's a journey to change rather than an overnight fix. That's the other thing. People want an overnight fix. No one. I'm never going to become a good guitarist overnight. This is like a 5-year plan. And you know, I was at a lesson yesterday where I was thinking, gosh, I'm actually okay right now. Like imagine in 5 years' time. And I thought that I was like, it's crazy to think that I'm thinking about me in 5 years' time playing guitar. You know, but we don't. We're not always very good at seeing ourselves in the future. So it's the 5-year plan, 10-year plan. You know, where do you want to be? Who do you want to be?
Yeah, the who do you want to be is huge because I find habits and goals they stick a lot better for me when I kind of link them a bit more to my identity of like, who do I want to be? What does that person do? Am I doing those things? Does this habit ladder up to that thing? And instead of being someone who's like, I want to go on a run, I'll be like, I'm a runner. I want to be a runner. So it's not an action that's separate from me. It's becoming like a part of me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'd read somewhere one of your suggestions that sometimes you do need to change your routine drastically to like shock your system when you're learning a new habit. What's your take on that? Is it like if you're trying to become a morning person, if you're struggling with it, instead of moving your bedtime or your wake up time up 10 minutes every day, is it like just rip the Band-Aid off, get up at 5 and see what happens?
Either will work. What I would say is that if you're in a position where you've moved to a new place or you have a big change, that is the perfect time to change your habits. So, you know, I didn't have a lot of habits that needed to change, but when I moved to Madeira, so Portugal, I wanted to exercise more regularly. Like I exercise regularly. I've always been a big exerciser. I preach it, but I didn't lift enough weight. I prefer to do things like Pilates and running, tennis, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But the research does say that we need to lift under tension, around 70% of our 1 rep max. And it's always been the pitfall in my training is that I've always preferred other things. So when I moved here, everything was new, from language to the side of the road that we drive on to my house, to every single thing was different. That was the perfect time to incorporate a new habit. So if you are going through a change, embrace it. Like, grab it with both hands and run, because you have the opportunity to really do something here. If you're not going through a change, that's fine. Maybe change your room around. Maybe, this is why people cut their hair. It's like the subconscious thing that we don't understand. But when people go through breakups and they chop their hair off, I'm like, I get it. Because you're trying to change.
These bangs were born of trauma.
They look good. Trust me, I've seen worse, and I can tell you I've had worse.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That's so helpful. Creating,
cut your head.
Yeah, shave your head.
Change your room around and see what happens.
That makes so much sense. I love to travel. I travel a ton every year, and I once, after a bad breakup, had a boyfriend. The last message he sent me before I blocked him was, "You can go anywhere you want in the world, but you'll still be you." Like, as an insult. And like, anyways, cool, bro. Thanks for the feedback. But I disagree, because I actually think I love travel so much because it shocks me into a new way of being, into a new culture, into a new routine. Everything is different, and I'm super primed to make changes that I've been wanting to change. Yeah. So in my normal routine at home, if I want to be writing every single day, I have a lot of trouble doing that. And then all of a sudden I'm like shocked into a new culture, new routine, new everything. And it's really easy for me to write every single day. And so like making sure that you can keep that going when you get home is, maybe another story, but it allows me to at least start and test new ways of doing things when I travel and move around. And so that makes a lot more sense now why that works. That's really cool. Embrace change, run towards it.
I resonate with that. I've always been a 5:45, 6 a.m. kind of person. And lately when I finished a book, I didn't have to get up in the morning for a long time because I took time off. And I got into a habit of sleeping in, going to bed at 12, waking up at 8. It's very unlike me. I've never been late. 8 o'clock's not even that late, but it's just very late for me. Yeah. And when I went to the States, I actually thought this is the perfect time to hone in on that jet lag and start incorporating that habit again. So I went back to waking up at 5:30 in the morning. And again, I don't suggest that anyone should wake up at 5:30 if they're not people that morning people. I am. So I like it. But it was just interesting because I saw it as an opportunity. I thought, let's grab it, by the horns and crack on. And I'm back to waking up at 6 a.m. now. So it's great.
Yeah. Sometimes those seemingly like difficult or annoying things can actually be a bit of a gift. Like, we don't consider jet lag to be like an enjoyable thing, but I'm the same when I spend a lot of the year in California, and the 3-hour time difference from where I am allows me to wake up so much earlier. I am notoriously not a morning person. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I'm like automatically waking up with the sun because I'm using that jet lag to my advantage. So that's a great hack, guys. If you're struggling, just move, just travel, just move. Yeah. To move. And if you can't move something around, change your environment a little bit. Maybe start going a different way to work, I want to give some low-hanging fruits. Obviously, I've given the high-hanging fruits, like shaving your head, but the low-hanging fruits to perhaps take a different route to work. Start walking, start cycling instead of, driving. And then, you can start incorporating some new habits around that and just really embracing that change. I love that. That's a great idea. I also want to pick your brain about boosting productivity and focus. And I read in some of your work the idea of mental currency and how it's the brain's limited energy capacity and how cognitive overload can lead us to lack focus, and it can lead to like indecisiveness. So how do we hack that focus and maximize our mental currency? Yeah. And I love this conversation. So as I said earlier, that was my area of research. So if we have this availability of energy on a daily basis, the question I always ask is, where are you spending this currency? If you are trying to incorporate a habit, like you don't want to keep eating cheese on toast when you get home from work, but you've been scrolling on your phone all day, you have essentially given all your available resources to make a better decision for yourself in the afternoon to social media. So then you come home and then you think, oh, I can't be bothered. I'm just going to eat that glass of cheese on toast. But the thing is, people don't put those two together because they don't see how the decisions you make during the day all amount to an ending of how you're going to finish your day.
right? And so see it as a quite literally a currency. You know, I'm giving money to this, I'm giving money to that. There's nothing wrong with social media. Use it to your advantage. Have fun. Go into an Instagram hole. I love it. I'm sometimes lying in the bath, laughing my head off. I don't do it very often, but when I do, I'm like, I'm having the best time of my life.
Yeah.
Like, it's making those conscious decisions about where you're spending your money, right? Am I arguing with people on the internet? Am I arguing with people in real life? Am I finding things to get annoyed about? And that's all taken away from this currency for your available ability to make better choices for yourself.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Helpful.
Yeah?
Yeah, it does. I think it's like self-awareness that really comes down, because I often a day will go by, I'm like, what the heck did I do? Like, how did I spend my time? Like, I know I was sitting at my computer and I know I was working, but like, what was I working on? And was I actually working the whole time? Or did I get really distracted by this thing that popped up? And so maybe the first step is like becoming actually really aware of how we're spending our mental currency. And then we can make the decisions of, am I spending them in the right places? Can I spend them elsewhere? How can I focus on the things that really need it? And I don't know much about this, but I would love to hear a bit more about the RAS, the reticular activating system, because it seems like that's like, we could leverage that to focus more effectively if it's this filtering system. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So your reticular activating system is essentially a system that filters out unimportant stimuli. So at the moment, you have a wonderful background of trees, which I've now paid attention to. I've got things in my background. My office is very messy at the moment. And there are things in your periphery. So, I can see my microphone here. I can see my printer on the right-hand side. I'm not looking at it. I'm still paying attention to you. Those pieces of information are still coming through your eyes. My brain is just blocking all of that out to say, Jill is important right now. The sound of your voice is important right now. Earlier on, my dog was barking. My godfather was chatting, and I could hear him, and I could feel my attention being pulled towards those things, and I was actively pulling them back. Now, the reticular activating system works by filtering that information out. So if there was a low buzzing sound in the background, after a while, you wouldn't really hear it anymore until you started to pay attention to that sound again. And so what that means is that when you say to yourself things like, I'm having a bad day, now your brain is going to try and look for confirmation bias as to why you're having a bad day, and you're going to start noticing more of the things that tell you you're having a bad day. It's the same concept as when you're trying to buy a blue BMW, and now you see them everywhere. There was always the same amount of blue BMWs, it's just that you now see them more often. And that's the concept with the reticular activating system, is that it filters out unimportant stimuli, but if you attach importance to something, it will start filtering it through. So if you're attaching importance to things like, I'm not good enough, I can't, I don't have the capacity to change, I want to scroll on social media, I want to argue with people, that is what your brain is going to essentially, for lack of a better term, I don't want to sound too woo-woo, attract.
Yeah. Well, and prioritize, because it sounds like it's almost like an algorithm. And so the more you like keep clicking on something mentally and focusing on something, the more it will keep like serving that up to you out in the real world and making you pay attention to it. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense that like being aware of this system and like what we're feeding it can help us stop paying attention to thoughts or things that are not positive for us. So if your biggest issue right now is like you're not getting your work done because you're always on social media, so then we can be aware of like, what are we putting importance on and prioritizing, and how can we filter that out? Or if it's you need to focus more on self-efficacy and like proof that you can succeed and that you are enough, then it's like surrounding yourself with those kinds of thoughts and those kinds of people and allowing that to be what filters through.
Absolutely. And, positive affirmations can work depending on the context. But if you say to yourself things like, I can do it, then you are more likely to allow that proof through that says, hey, you just did that, rather than overlook it and think, oh, well, you didn't do it well, or I told you couldn't do it,
Yeah. I love what you do, and I love learning this stuff because it explains the science behind some of these things that can be considered woo-woo, or like there's so much mindset stuff out there, and I believe in a lot of it, but I also love to understand why and how, and make sure that I'm like believing in something that has, has legs. So that's so helpful in understanding why what we think about and focus on really, like, manifestation, like it's a abstract concept when we don't understand how it works, but now that we can learn more about how our brain prioritizes and focuses and filters through that lens, it becomes really clear. So brain health is key for mental health. And I love your phone analogy of our brain's hardware and software. Can you talk more about that and share what that analogy is?
Yeah. So, things like sleep, nutrition, exercise, those are all components of our well-being that contribute to the integrity of the hardware that is your brain, the actual mechanism, the physiology in which the thoughts reside. And if that part of the brain isn't functioning well because you're not taking care of your stress management, you're not getting enough sleep, you're implicating your ability to then make better decisions, to think more effectively. And so what that means is that the software is struggling to essentially run on a piece of machinery that is not compatible or able to withstand any software upgrades. It's almost like having an old iPhone, and now you need to do all those software updates and it starts crashing. We can continue to upgrade the hardware components. So, maybe it's trading, I'm not, you can't trade your brain in, but you can keep it up to a certain standard so that it's, progressing with the software updates. What I've seen time and time again is that people want to make changes, but then when I start working with them, the basics aren't there. The sleep isn't there, the meditation, the mental currency, the nutrition, the hydration, all of those things are lacking. And we can't make any major changes until that foundation is really solid.
Yeah. It's really hard to mentally feel good if you are physically exhausted, drained, burnt out, if you're like not firing on all cylinders. And so we want to make these mindset changes and improve our mental health. But I do really agree that the brain health, like, it has to be a holistic approach. So what would you say that, like, the top habits you would recommend for people who are looking to improve their mental health? What would those top brain health habits be to start with?
I'll start with something that will help for burnout, because I think a lot of people struggle with stress, burnout, etc. And it's, I don't want to put the onus on the individual too much in saying that, you need to change and make these hardware upgrades when you're living in a situation that isn't helpful to you. But what is helpful is to remove the excess. If, again, you've got this pool of capacity of what you can handle, try and get rid of the ones that are not serving you. Maybe it's more boundaries. Maybe it's putting an automatic reply on your email response that says, hey, I'm really busy right now. I will get back to you in the next few days. I have that. If you don't hear from me, please assume that I'm eternally grateful for your interest in working with me, but I just don't have the capacity, And those kind of steps can help to mitigate how much energy you're then putting back out into the world to say no to people or to turn people down. You could communicate with your friends, say, look, I'm going through a really difficult period right now. I don't want to look at my phone. I don't have the capacity to answer a text. And people will argue and say it takes 30 seconds to answer a text. And yes, it does, but it also takes a lot of mental capacity to do something when you're not in a position to even maybe look after yourself. So put in those walls, put in those boundaries, put in those conversations with people, and just remove the excess. Say no to the party, say no to the extra late hours, and just really close in on what's important to you so that you can recuperate. It's an energy system, and you need to refill that energy system. You need to recharge that battery or fill up the cup, whatever analogy you want to use, before you can, put yourself out again. So that's one of the biggest hacks for me, is to just really assess what is important and let go of what isn't.
And then it's all the annoying stuff, because it's hard, but it's true. The exercise, the meditation that can like increase the pathways and the neuroplasticity, like what you feed your body, and making sure that that's not making you feel like crap. All of that is kind of, I think, the foundation to feeling at a base level a bit better, so that you can then like tweak a bit more.
Exactly. And start low, start with a walk. If you can't handle the thought of running, I can understand that. If you can't handle the thought of going to the gym twice a week, that's cool. Stretch at home. Do a home workout. Whip out a Jane Fonda DVD. I don't know. Just do something that's going to make you feel good. Start low. Start with that low-hanging fruit, and then just go from there. Because I think people also feel like it's daunting to start doing all these things when you think of perfection. Well, I've got to run 3 days a week and I've got to lift twice a week because that's what the internet says is good for you. Just start somewhere, you know?
Yeah. Switching out of the all or nothing and into the what can I do? Well, then let's
Exactly.
just do what I can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think, honestly, one of the lowest hanging fruits is just making sure you're hydrating correctly. Even a 2% dehydration can cause temporary cognitive decline, can impair our psychomotor activity, so how quickly we can think, react, and respond to things. Wow. So just making sure that you're hydrating throughout the day effectively and correctly can help. And what that means is just, making sure that you're just drinking a little bit more. Just takes a sip of water.
No, I am constantly dehydrated. Like, I needed to hear that. That was for me.
Yeah.
I am a raisin in human form. Yeah. So that's good to know.
Drink more water.
Drink more water. I can do that. I can do that. My last question that I always ask my guests is, what is one thing that you wish you had learned in school that would have prepared you for adulthood?
Oh, there is no such thing as failure.
That's a good one.
No such thing as failure.
I love that.
It's just learning. It's just another entry point, data. And your brain is a piece of machinery, and failure is just another piece of data point. So you now have more information about what to do or what not to do to not get to that outcome again. It's just data entry.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. This was such a good conversation. I'm so excited to implement some new things after talking to you. I feel like it's so useful to have like the broad strokes of self-improvement and mindset backed up by the neuroscience of how it works. So thank you so much for what you do. I love chatting with you. I could chat with you all day, but I will let you go. Please share where people can follow you and purchase your book.
Yeah, so Rewire is available everywhere and anywhere. You can find me on Instagram as Nicole's Neuroscience. I'm actually launching a YouTube channel in September, so you can find me on YouTube as well as Nicole's Neuroscience or Nicole Vignola, one or the other. It'll be there.
Thank you so much for your amazing wisdom and for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jill. I really appreciate it.